Okay, and we're back. Sorry about that. I had to go turn on the air conditioning, so if there's a little bit of fan noise in the background, I apologize for that. My PC does put out quite a lot of heat, and it gets rather warm in my office. So we just selected a realm, and we are now at the character select screen. This is where you will create the character or the persona that you will use throughout your journeys in World of Warcraft. Now, the first thing that you will want to choose is whether you want to play as a female or a male character. Obviously, they look different. The males are typically larger, more muscular, just like in real life. The females are more lithe and thinner, more feminine, obviously. But other than the physical appearance, there is no difference. The men versus the women, there's no difference in abilities or there's no gender-specific perks or reputation gains or anything like that. Once you've decided on male versus female, the next thing you will want to take a look at is whether you want to play for the Alliance or for the Horde. Now, as far as what the Alliance and the Horde stand for, the Alliance is typified as being more noble or more... it's difficult to describe. They're more concerned with abstract concepts like nobility, honor, righteousness, things like that. They are made up of humans, dwarves, night elves, gnomes, Draenei, and Worgen. There's a lot of misconception about the Alliance, and the Horde, for that matter. The Alliance and the Horde are not really good versus evil. It's more of a difference in philosophies. The Alliance, like I mentioned earlier, is very noble, very regal, and they're very concerned with what they call the light. It's their, I guess you could call it a religion or a spirituality. Whereas the Horde is typically a little more gruff, more down to earth. However, the Horde is also very much driven by honor and tradition, strength, action, things like this, more than, for example, diplomacy, which would be a trait of the Alliance. The races in the Horde are orcs, undead, or usually called Forsaken, the Tauren, the Trolls, the Blood Elves, and the Goblins. Now you probably noticed there's another race down here at the bottom, which is the Pandaren, and they are able to be played as either the Alliance or the Horde. The other races, you'll need to pick one or the other. As far as which faction you choose, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. The leveling experience tends to be slightly easier and more pleasant for the Alliance than the Horde, just because of the areas and the quest lines that are in those areas. Also, depending on what type of scenery you would like to see while you're playing, if you want to see more forests and, green, lush places, then I would suggest playing as an Alliance character. The Horde, most of the starting zones are either, in the case of the Forsaken and some of the other races, very dark and gloomy, or in the case of the Orcs and the Trolls, it's very barren and desert-like. So it really just depends on what you prefer. Really quickly, let's go over the different excuse me, the different races that you can play as. So starting with the Alliance, you can play as a human. Now, when choosing a race, there are certain race traits and perks that vary from one to the other. For example, humans, you have increased versatility. You have a bonus to your reputation gains. So in the game, you earn reputation or standing with various factions, political factions or different groups. And so if you're a human, you have an increase to the percentage of that you gain. Also, probably one of the most important traits that the humans have, if you are interested in player versus player content, they have a racial ability which allows them to break what they call CC or crowd control effects. For example, certain classes in the game can turn people into a sheep, or make them cower in fear and shake in place or run away, or stun them, for example. The humans have the ability to break out of that based on a racial trait, in addition to spells or trinkets. So they do have an extra mode of breaking that CC effect. And for that reason, a lot of PvP players, or players who are very heavily into battlegrounds and arenas where you play against other human players, will pick a human. Now, Blizzard has said that they will be revamping all of these traits once the Legion expansion comes out, which is scheduled to release on August 30th. So they have talked about making that trait either go away or be not so powerful, so that people are able to play other races without being at a disadvantage in player versus player content. The next race in the Alliance are Dwarves. They have the ability to, it says, take on a stone form. It's an ability that you can activate to harden your skin and take reduced damage for a short period of time. They also take increased effect from critical strike. They're resistant to frost damage, and they're able to find archaeology fragments and survey faster. So just a quick note on that. Archaeology is one of several professions that you can have in the game. So if you're interested in having a bonus to archaeology, then Dwarves might be for you. Now, honestly, unless it's something that I specifically call out, like the human's ability to break the crowd control effects, it's not really going to make a difference when you're playing. For example, Night Elves, how they're resistant to nature damage, or they have faster attacks at night and increased crit during the day. Really, there is increased statistics, or increased abilities that it says here, but the amount that they're increased is so minuscule that you will not notice, honestly, anything. There's more of an effect to be had by practicing and honing your abilities as a player than these increased stats will give you. Okay, Night Elves. Their racial ability is that they can fade into the shadows. This may be useful while leveling. If there is a monster or some creature that's attacking you, you can activate this ability and they will stop attacking you and you'll become shadow melded and basically just fade into the shadows. You're still there. You're not like, don't become a spirit or anything. You just kind of fade into the background. And the monster or animal will stop attacking you and you can then have a chance to get away potentially. It's worth noting that this doesn't work on high-level endgame content like raid bosses or dungeons or things like that. This would just be out in the world while you are doing quests during the leveling up process. And one other thing about the Night Elf that, again, doesn't make any difference, but is kind of cool. When you die as one of the other races, you show up as a spirit form of your player, and you have to run back to your corpse in order to resurrect. The Night Elves don't appear as a spirit form of their body. They appear as a wisp, basically an orb or ball of light energy that you would then float, I guess, to your corpse and resurrect. Anyway, next is gnomes. They're able to escape from speed altering effects, so effects that slow down your player. They have an increased engineering skill. Other than that, these other traits really don't make that big of a difference. Gnomes typically are, most people either love them or hate them. They do have a very strong popularity among some players. Other players can't stand them. They're kind of meant to be goofy, fun type of a race. The Draenei is one of the races that was introduced in the first expansion, the Burning Crusade. They are technically from another planet from the rest of these races. They are very noble, very much interested in following the light. They're very religious and very much about righteousness and things like that. The last true alliance race that we have is the Worgen, and you'll notice if I minimize this that there's a human here and a Worgen here. If I go like this, you'll be able to see it better. That's because the Worgen are humans that have been affected by a curse and are now have the ability to shapeshift into a wolf. So they're basically a werewolf. And this race was introduced during World of Warcraft's 4th expansion, the Cataclysm. They do have a nice trait known as, I think it's called Dark Flight. Basically, it lets you run really fast, which can be useful in the levels before level 20, because it's only at level 20 that you obtain a mount, like a horse or some other vehicle that lets you move faster. Go ahead and move to the Horde now. First race for the Horde is the Orc. These are your typical orcs from every game or fantasy franchise pretty much that you've ever seen. They're muscly, they have fangs, they're kind of gruff. They have the ability to enrage themselves for a short period of time, which increases damage. Next is the Undead or the Forsaken. And I'll go ahead and put this out there with the caveat that the Forsaken are my favorite race to play. There's a lot of cool lore or backstory associated with the Forsaken. They are able to remove certain CC or crowd control effects such as fear, sleep, and charm. They also have a racial trait which lets them consume corpses to regain health. So you don't have to necessarily carry food or potions in your bag when you're out in the world doing quests. Once you kill a monster or whatever the creature is that you're fighting, you then activate the ability and you're able to consume its corpse and regain some of your health. The Tauren are probably the most alliance-like of the Horde. They are very much about nature. They're a race basically of giant cows. They're pretty cool, pretty fun. But they're very nature-oriented, very shamanistic. They typify the Native American culture. Their capital city is on a series of large plateaus. They have totem poles and teepees in their capital city. And then they're a pretty cool race. The trolls are one of the oldest races in Azeroth, which is the world wherein World of Warcraft takes place. The trolls are stereotyped as being almost islander or Jamaican. They are into voodoo. They like to say "Yaman" and things like that. They have another useful racial trait, the ability to berserk to increase attack speed or casting speed. I have played trolls a lot. They're a lot of fun. A lot of people don't like the troll feat, which is one thing you might want to keep in mind if you are a stickler for appearances. Even though you might have boots or some type of footwear equipped in the game, it won't show on the troll. You'll always have the big feet with the toes. So if that bothers you, don't play a troll. Next is the Blood Elves. These are the pretty boy preppies of the Horde. Perfectly fine race. Historically, in the story of the game, they were addicted to magic. They're very noble, very regal, but very what's the word to describe them? Almost self-centered and pious, but they're a lot of fun. And they do have some of the best character models in the game. All the armor fits them very well. They're very, very fun to play. Goblins are a lot of fun. They're kind of the counterpart to the gnomes. They're very much into engineering and tinkering and building things. They do have a cool racial ability which allows them to rocket jump forward for a short distance. They're also very much about profit, as Profit, not the religious profit, but financial profit. They are into it to gain something, and if they can't gain something, they're just not interested. If you're a Star Trek fan, they're very similar to the Ferengi, except they're not dumb like the Ferengi are. They're very smart. They're very good engineers. The last race is the Pandaren, or Pandaren, depends on how you want to say it. And as I said before, they can be either Alliance or Horde. The reason for this is they were recently introduced in WoW's 5th expansion, I believe, Mists of Pandaria. And they, until they were added to the game a couple expansions ago, lived in isolation on an island that's on the back of a turtle. And the island moves around the sea. When the game released, the island was discovered, made visible, and the Alliance and Horde both went to the island to try and tap its resources and things like that for their benefit. The Pandaren were given a choice to join either the Alliance or the Horde, and if you play a Pandaren, you actually will have that opportunity. You play up through, I believe it's level 10 or so, I don't remember, so my apologies if that's incorrect, but after that you have to choose if you want to be Alliance or Horde, and then you go to that faction's capital city and you meet with their king or their war chief, depending on which faction it is, and they officially accept you into the faction. So it's a pretty cool. It's different, which is cool, different than the other races. For the purposes of this video, let's do a Forsaken for the race, or an Undead. Personally, so when I started playing World of Warcraft, this was back in 2003, when what they call vanilla World of Warcraft was released. I didn't play as part of the beta, but when the game released, I initially played as Alliance with my friends. We all played Night Elves, and I played a Night Elf Druid, which is basically a shapeshifter that can change into like a panther or a bear or various other animals. It was pretty fun. I had a lot of fun with it. I also, for quite a while, played as a Draenei Paladin, and played that up through Wrath of the Lich King, the 3rd expansion. However, partway through the 2nd expansion, Burning Crusade, I started a Horde character. So I actually have played characters as all of these races, and played them all up to various levels of endgame raid content. But the ones that I've stuck with the most have been Horde players, or excuse me, Horde races. And since the end of Wrath of the Lich King, I have not played Alliance characters very much at all. At least not past... definitely not into any endgame content. I don't recall what level that my characters are on the Alliance side. Excuse me. My reason for that, and feel free to fast forward if you don't care to hear or are not interested by this, but the Alliance for me began to seem very cocky, self-centered, self-righteous, very holier than thou. And honestly, at the time I was playing, this is probably not the case anymore, but at the time I was playing, most of the player base that played Alliance were, I don't mean to offend anybody, they were younger, both in age and in their conduct and demeanor. There was a lot of kind of the stereotypical, hey, just that like taunting, and it's like, hey, your mom last night said I was great, blah blah blah, and it just really turned me off to the Alliance. I mean, trash talking is great and all, but it has its place, and I just got tired of all the drama, the trash talking, the tantrums that my guild mates and stuff would have. We'd be in a raid, something would go wrong, and people would just basically start throwing tantrums, screaming, quitting the guild, and then the next day saying, oh, I'm sorry, can I come back to the guild? That, along with the lore and the story of the game, just kind of turned me off to the Alliance. I see the Horde as more realistic than the Alliance. I realize this is a fantasy game, but I have a hard time with the light, bright fantasy. It's more fairy tale on the Alliance side, and it just doesn't really interest me. It gets boring after a while. The races on the Horde side have really rich backstory, especially when you look at the Forsaken, the Trolls, the Blood Elves, the Orcs in particular. And the Forsaken I identified with because they used to be human during the period of time leading up to when World of Warcraft quote unquote starts. They were humans in a kingdom called Lordaeron. There was an invasion. Just to keep it really brief, there was an invasion, a lot of them died, and then were brought back by the individual who invaded. But yeah, just long story short, they were invaded when they were human. They were all killed. They were all risen as undead and forced to fight against their kin, the other humans. And then that enemy was eventually defeated, and the Forsaken were released from his control, but they were basically cast out and rejected by what had been their kinsmen, the other humans. And so they made a home for themselves in a place called the Undercity, which is under the ruins of their old capital city. And so I just really identified with it. And there's a lot of really cool backstory. And yeah, so that's mostly what I've played. But I do play also, trolls and blood elves and Tauren. But that's enough of that. So moving along. So I would like to, for the purposes of this video, let's do a Forsaken, and let's see, what's a good... So good classes for starting players, I would say, are Warrior, because it's probably what you are used to in other games. Or if you're not new to MMO or RPG type games, there are some fairly standard classes over here. You have your Warrior, your Hunter, sometimes called Ranger in other games. You have Rogues, which are about stealth. They're more like assassin-y type things. You have Priests, sometimes called Clerics in other games, which is about healing other players. Mage, basically wizards. Monk, which is kind of like a rogue but with martial arts. But the classes I would recommend for people who are new to RPGs would be a Warrior, a Hunter, or a Warlock. Warrior because they are fairly easy to learn. They're not necessarily any less difficult to master than the other classes. They still do require a high amount of skill, just as high as all the other classes, once you reach the end game content and start raiding or doing arenas. But as far as their basic abilities while leveling, they're fairly straightforward. Hunters are a good class because they have a pet, and so you can send your pet out to attack an animal or a monster, and it will fight with your pet while you stand back and shoot it from a distance. So that makes it nice when you're leveling and questing if you're new, because typically the thing that you're fighting will not attack you directly until your pet dies. Warlock, I would recommend for the same reason. It's very similar to Hunter, except you are casting spells, you're not shooting guns or bows. And I think we'll do a Warlock for this one. So just really quick, you can see here, a Warlock's role is to do damage. So I should explain that by saying, in the game there are generally 3 roles. You have tanks, which could be warriors, paladins, death knights, things that are made to take damage while the rest of your group damages what it is that you're fighting, whatever boss or dungeon you're in. There's damage dealers, hunters, rogues, certain types of priests, mages, warlocks, certain types of monk, death knight, druid. Basically, every class in the game has an ability to be a damage dealer. Each class, once you progress in the game a little bit, you'll have anywhere from 3 to 4 different specs, is what it's called, that you can choose. And you can have 2 active at a time currently. You can switch back and forth between those 2. And so some of these classes, like for example the priest, are a hybrid class where you have 2 specs that are for healing and 1 that's for dealing damage. Or like the warrior and the death knight and the druid, you have, well, warrior and the death knight and the paladin, you have specs that are for tanking or damage, or in the case of the paladin and the druid, you have a tank, a damage, and a healer all in the same class. So, but as far as this video, we'll be playing a warlock. Warlocks have no tanking or healing specs. They have 3 different damage specs. They're able to summon demons to use as pets. They deal fire or shadow damage depending on what spec you choose. They can also apply curses to their enemies. They're just a lot of fun to play. So let's just jump right in, shall we? Alright, here's our Forsaken Warlock. On this screen, you'll be able to customize your character. You can choose various things like skin color, facial features. If you play as a Tauren, you can choose the type of horns you have. Blood Elves, you can choose earrings, things like that. Basically, whatever race you pick, you'll have different customization options. In the case of the Forsaken, the male Forsaken, you have skin color, face, hairstyle, hair color, and features. And let's just pick this, and hairstyle will go... Let's see. So if you want to rotate your character, you just click with the left mouse button and drag, by the way. I don't know how intuitive that is. Let's do this one. Hair color. Let's go with the purple. It'll match the warlock. Each class in the game is represented by a different color in like chat and other places, represented by a different color of text, and the warlock color is purple, so that's what I mean by it'll match the warlock. Let's just do something not too crazy. Let's give him a steel jaw. Okay, now to pick a name. Picking a name can be difficult sometimes. There's this randomize button that, suggests things for you. We spoke earlier about role-playing realms. If you're on a role-playing realm, there is a rule that your name has to be something that is believable to be that character's name. So you couldn't do something like, I love coffee. Nothing real world or anything like that. You also can't have names with anything offensive, any racial slurs, curse words, anything like that. So let's just use the randomizer. It's easier. I don't like that. Don't care for that. No. Yeah, sure. We'll be Garl Taunter.